All right, we're back with our next guest, Ron Maiellaro from the Fair Tax. I'm Andy, as you should already know. Now, Ron, for people who don't know anything about the Fair Tax, why is the Fair Tax more important today than back in the early 1930s when they got the 16th Amendment, and why should the IRS be abolished, and then the Amendment 16 should be removed?
Yeah, absolutely. The 16th Amendment was ratified in 1913. 1940s, we got withholding. You have to wonder, how did the people, the legislatures in 1913 say, yes, we want the federal government to tax our income? Because the reason they needed a 16th Amendment was because the Constitution, as originally written, did not allow for an income tax. So they had to amend the Constitution. All right, the founders have to amend the Constitution because the founders, as the Constitution was ratified in 1789, it did not allow the federal government or the Congress to implement an income tax. The founders understood that an income tax was a bad idea, could be abused, and lead to tyranny. And so we functioned very nicely for over 120 years without an income tax. Okay, but then of course things change, and they thought they couldn't live without the income tax, and they told people, don't worry about it, it's only going to be a small tax on the most wealthy Americans. In the beginning, it was a 1% tax on people that made over $3,000, $4,000 if you were married. But in 1913, $3,000 was the equivalent of $270,000 now. So only the more wealthy people were taxed. That didn't last long. Because you fast forward 30 years to 1943, that's when they passed the withholding law. Now they're saying, well, you know what? It's so important that we have to tax everybody from their paycheck as soon as they get paid. And it's so important that we have to collect your tax money before you take your paycheck home and provide for your family. And it's only gotten worse. I mean, in the beginning, in 1913, everything to do with the income tax comprised in about 400 pages, everything. Now it's over 70,000 pages. It's so complicated that it's impossible for any one person to fully understand it.
Charlie Rangel can't even figure it out.
Yes, and neither do I. That's why I buy software on my computer, and I just pray that the software is correct, because there's no way to understand it all. Okay, so it's gotten out of hand. We know that the IRS is not behaving in a nonpartisan manner. We are volunteers with the Florida Fair Tax Education Association, which is a 501c3, and we were granted that status by the IRS. Thank you, IRS, because we're trying to put you out of business anyways. But can we say today that the IRS is nonpartisan with what we've learned in the last few months? I don't think so. We're required to be nonpartisan. We don't talk about parties and candidates and so forth. We talk about taxes. And our sole purpose is to tell people, educate people that there is an alternative to the current income tax, and that's the fair tax. It's been around. It's actually legislation in Congress. It's H.R. 25. We've got, thanks to the IRS, we've got more co-sponsors than ever before, because people are really ticked. You know, and they understand that the fair tax has the best chance of replacing what we have. And it would replace the income tax, repeal the 16th Amendment, and abolish the IRS. Instead of being taxed on what we earn and how much and how hard we work, we would be taxed when we buy stuff and when we pay for services. So it's a very different concept, but it's a very simple concept, because the entire bill is only like 132 pages, the entire bill, double-spaced, all right? Whereas, you know, the tax code we have now is obviously significantly larger. So think of it in terms of when you get your paycheck, you get your whole paycheck. There's no federal withholding, all right? When April 15th comes, it's just April 15th. It's just another spring day. There's no 1040 to fill out. The only time you do any paperwork, so to speak, is that when you go to the store and you buy something, on the receipt, it'll tell you what you spent on your products and how much you spent on the fair tax. It's completely transparent. So it's so simple, and there's nothing else for the individual to do, except for one thing. There is a provision in there We don't want people to have to pay tax on the basic necessities of life. All right. No government is so important that they have to tax the basic necessities of life. So there's a mechanism called the prebate. And if you don't know what it is, I encourage you to go to fairtax.org or here in Florida, flfairtax.org, and learn about the prebate. But it is the key to fairness for the fair tax. So there's no IRS, there's no withholding, there's no income tax, there's no 1040, there's no April 15th deadline. You pay the taxes when you pay your bills, and it's only new products that are taxed under the fair tax. Used products are not subject to the fair tax because once you pay the fair tax once, that's it. It's not again. So if you buy a used car, there's no fair tax on it. If you buy a new car, yes, the fair tax will be charged on that. But it also, let's be clear, it'll be on groceries, it'll be on your medical bills, it'll be on everything. Everybody pays the fair tax on all services and new goods. Everybody gets the prebate. And that's it. And that's all, that sums it up in a nutshell. Now, there are people that try to criticize it to say, well, it's not fair because it's a consumption tax, which means it's a sales tax, and therefore it's regressive and it hurts the poor. Those people don't understand the prebate. The prebate erases the regressive nature. If it weren't for the prebate, it would be just another sales tax, all right? But it's not. It's much more than that. So there's a lot about it, and if you're talking about replacing the entire federal income tax, you have to do your homework. So I encourage people to go to the websites and learn. There's a great book called The Fair Tax Book, very simple title, by Bortz and Linder. It was written in 2005, and they wrote another one, a second version, in 2008. That's how I got introduced. I heard about it on the radio. When the book came out, I read it, and I thought, this really makes a lot of sense, It's so simple, and it makes sense, It was kind of like, why didn't I think of this, And so I gave it to my wife, and she said, yeah, this is good. Well, at the time, we had a small truck leasing business, and I actually spent quite a bit of time away from home. We sold the business, sold the trucks, and I told her, I want to get involved in this fair tax. Well, Nick and Barb, the folks that own the big motor home, they were the Marion County coordinators. We're from Ocala, by the way. And they were the Marion County coordinators, so we helped them out from time to time. We would put on presentations. They got promoted to district directors. They asked us to be Marion County coordinators. And now, actually, my wife and I are coordinators for District 3. But when the call goes out, Nick, can you bring your fair tax motorhome? We're having an event in Niceville. They're there, all right? We were up in Orange Park a few weeks ago. We'll be, maybe, I think, in Green Cove Springs next month. Nick and Barb are also very, very dedicated to the fair tax, and will do just about anything to help educate people because we think it's that important. Now, I'll make one final note. I have 7 grandchildren. I'm doing this for them. I would like for my grandchildren to never have to fill out a 1040, to wonder what the IRS was, so that they never have to experience it for themselves. That's really why I'm doing this. So I hope that helps. I hope people will go on the websites and buy the book and learn about it because we are talking about replacing the entire federal income tax system, and that is a big deal. So it behooves you to do your homework. So,
other than educating just people on fair tax, what about politicians? Have you got any on board that's wanting to repeal the 16th Amendment, which, by the way, to go back and piggyback what you said earlier, was our founding fathers, you're absolutely right, never anticipated anybody being taxed on basically on the fruits of their labor. And in I believe it was 1895, that it had actually hit the Supreme Court on the income tax, and it was voted down. That is why they had to add it as an amendment to the United States Constitution. So do you have anyone that's backing this or trying to put forth a bill to remove the IRS, which has become one of the biggest collection agencies that the American people fear today?
There are several pieces of legislation. The fair tax legislation is H.R. 25. It's in the House. We have a total between the House and the Senate, 84 co-sponsors. Here in Congress, here in Florida, we have 11 representatives that are co-sponsors, including, I believe you're in District 1 here. Jeff Miller's your representative. He is also a co-sponsor. And where we live, we're in District 3. That's Ted Yoho's district. He is a co-sponsor. And where Nick and Barb live, which is just a few miles south of Ocala, they're in Rich Nugent. He's also a co-sponsor. So, yes, there is legislation. There's another piece of legislation, HJR 104, which is repeal the 16th Amendment. All right, and that's, I think the primary sponsor is Jim Bridenstine from Oklahoma, and I don't know at this point how many co-sponsors, but that's kind of like sister legislation, because if they were successful with that and repeal the 16th Amendment, that means the IRS has no authority to do anything anymore. And so what would you do? Well, the fair tax stands in line as the best alternative to what we have. It's also got the most research behind it. Over $20 million of privately funded research shows that the fair tax is the way to go. So yes, there is legislation, there is support for it. We have congressmen on board. We are constantly working on other congressmen, trying to get them on board, not only in Florida, but all across the country.
Why do you think any congressmen or senators would actually oppose such legislation to bring in the fair tax and rein in the IRS?
They kind of like what they have now.
Money?
Yeah, it's all not just money, but the power. All right, Congress people are very good at manipulating the current income tax code. Why else did it get to 74,000 pages? Because they put a little piece in here that's going to favor an industry in their district, or they're going to put a little piece of legislation, a little addition here that's going to maybe harm the political opponents. Okay. Some Congress people are very good at playing the game. They've been there a long time. They like their power. They like their perks. They like the income tax. All right. And so, yes, they are threatened by the fair tax, but not the people who are co-sponsors. They understand that we need something better for this country, and our grandchildren deserve it. All right. My grandchildren deserve it, and everybody does. So there are some opponents to it. They will find fault with it. But when you really look into the fair tax, its simplicity and the research behind it show you that this really is the best answer to what we have.
All right. Well, that was Ron, and I totally forgot your last name. And I know earlier you said that your brother Maiellaro, because he did say earlier. What were we supposed to say other than Maiellaro?
Technically, it's supposed to be pronounced Maiellaro.
Maiellaro.
I say that for my brother's sake, because if he hears me say Maiellaro, he gets on me. But you know, my wife even says if it begins with M, we usually answer.
So we just call you Ron M.
Yeah.
Yeah, that works.
Exactly.
All right, so we have Ron M here with the fair tax. And what was that website one more time?
Fairtax.org is the national site. FLFairtax.org is the Florida fair tax site.
All right. All right, that was Ron from the fair tax, and I'm Andy sitting here with Operation We the People.